Good afternoon, everyone. This is Charles Rather, Managing Partner at Amlaw Group, where we focus on your successful and seamless transition to the United States. And we try to focus on not only the immigration and legal aspects, but on some of the other broader issues that affect almost all of our clients when looking to move to the U.S. And that brings us to today's topic, which is not directly related to immigration, but is very important to the majority of our clients. What to do with your kids and school if you're in the U.S. and awaiting a change of status or an adjustment of status. So to remind you, adjustment of status is when you're going from a non-immigrant category to an immigrant category. Change of status is when you're going from one non-immigrant category to another non-immigrant category. So generally, the majority of people come in on a tourist visa. Maybe then they want to change their status to F1 to be a student, an E2 if they start up a business, or maybe they want to switch over to an EB5 and get a green card. In all of those cases, there's time that has to go by from the time you enter as a tourist, so you can't file any of this paperwork until 90 days have gone by since you entered the US. And then even after the 90 days have gone by, you need to prepare your paperwork, file it, and depending on the type of visa or status you're applying for, you might get a result in 15 days, or you might have to wait a couple years. And so the question often comes up, what do I do with my kids during this time? I can't leave my kids at home for 2 years, and that's obviously the case. That there's no expectation your kids are going to stay at home for 2 years. But in addition, sometimes, there might be a delay with your processing for the change of status. It was supposed to be done in 15 days, and maybe they issued an RFE, and it's taken a month or 2 months, and there's these delays. What do I do with my kids? I don't want my kids to sit at home for 2 or 3 months without school, no learning, just sitting and watching TV. So the problem under U.S. law is there's really two different laws that govern this, and they are quite contradictory. So the first general law is if you come on a tourist visa, which is kind of the base general status. If you've got a different status, such as an F1, this really doesn't affect you so much. So let's assume you've got a tourist visa. You're not allowed to send your kids to school, whether it's private or government, public school. You're not allowed to send them there while they're in a B1, B2 status. So that's a problem. But then there's another law that kind of compensates for this, where it says that schools cannot inquire about the immigration status of the children. And again, we're talking about schools here, so up to 12th grade. Once you look at, higher education, community colleges, universities, that's a whole different situation. That's, if you don't have the rights to go to school, they're going to check your paperwork. And if you don't have the right paperwork, you're not going to be able to enroll. But we're talking about schools, again, up to 12th grade. That the other law says that if your child wants to enroll and you otherwise meet all the requirements, you live in the school district, you can prove your residence, at an address in that area, you have all the vaccinations, then they're not allowed to inquire about the status of the child, the immigration status. So on the one hand, you're not able to do anything. On the other hand, there's a law that basically allows you to do whatever you want. And so some of this information I'm going to give in this video today, I'm going to alert you to what the law says, but I'm also going to share with you what a lot of people do and what your chances are. So again, these are any legal considerations or legal advice I'm giving to you. I'm just telling you what people do and what are your chances of having any problems, but it's ultimately up to you to make that decision. So technically, your kids aren't supposed to go to school while you're awaiting a change of status until they've gotten that change of status. And if we're talking about typical non-immigrant visas like E2s, L1s, maybe even F1s, that process can take, 6 months or longer sometimes. So it's absolutely ridiculous to think that your children are going to sit at school for 6 or 9 months doing nothing, sitting on their iPads, and just kind of wasting away. And to be honest, I think the government itself understands that. But the government also understands that if they were to openly come out and say, hey, any tourists coming to America, hey, please come to our schools, use our schools, for the next 6 months while you're here vacationing, go at it. I mean, there would be very significant political backlash for that as well, and probably for understandable reasons. So it's a bit of a don't ask, don't tell type of situation. Your children basically aren't supposed to go to school, but if they do go to school, no one's going to ask, and very unlikely anybody's going to find out. Now, if you look purely from a legal perspective, I think the most legally unjustified situation is if you came as a tourist, you were here for 2 weeks, and boom, you sent your kids to school. That looks a bit too fishy, right? It looks like you had the intention from the very beginning to send your kids to school before you came to the U.S. And at some point, that could come up and create some problems further down the road. I think it's quite unlikely that problems would come up, but you're on pretty thin ice if you send your kids to school very shortly, a couple weeks, maybe even a month after you come to the U.S., because that's showing you really didn't have just tourist intent, to come here temporarily, that you put your kids in school and you're planning to be here a long time. But if you're going to file for change of status or adjustment, and as you know, you have to wait 90 days to do that. After 90 days, if it's, that's enough time for you to change your mind and decide, hey, I want to stay in the U.S. and file my paperwork, I think that's generally considered enough time to say, hey, we've reconsidered our plans. Maybe we came as tourists originally. Things have changed, maybe in the homeland, maybe here, and we want to stay here longer. Then at that point, when you file for that change of status, you have much more legal grounds to then send your kids to school. You can say, hey, look, we started the process of getting our E2 status or L1 status, and 90 days or 3 months have already gone by. That's a long time for our kids not to be in school. Hey, we've finally enrolled them at this point. If you want to be completely safe and not have any kind of contradictions with the law, you'd probably wait until not only the main applicant, but also all the dependents, including the kids, got their approval. Problem with that, like I said, is that whole process can take 6 to 9 months or even longer. So to have your kids outside of school for that long, I think is a little bit crazy. And to be quite honest, I don't think the government is ever going to really enforce that. So as I said, if we look at things to summarize it, if you send your kids to school relatively soon after you come to the U.S., you're opening yourself up to some problems. But if you wait until when you file your paperwork, or maybe just before you file your paperwork to change your status, you send them to school, I think you're on pretty good footing. Yes, technically you're going against one of the laws, but at the same time, there's this other law that says you're not supposed to inquire about the immigration status of kids. And there's also a societal interest in not having kids, just skip out school for a significant amount of time, and that's going to interfere with their future education and learning. So if you wait until when you file for the change or adjustment of status, I think you're on pretty safe grounds. The only time this kind of issue might even come up is when you're maybe entering the country. So let's say the main applicant got his or her approval, leaves the U.S., comes back to the U.S. Again, you probably don't want to do that in any case, because if your wife and children haven't yet gotten a change of status, you really can't leave the country anyway. But let's say this is hypothetical. You're leaving the country, you're coming back. The officer's asking you, are your kids in the U.S.? Is your spouse in the U.S.? What are they doing? What are your kids doing here? It's going to be kind of difficult to say, well, they're just playing Nintendo, and they've been playing Nintendo for the last 6 months. So that's why it's problematic maybe if you're planning to cross the border. And that's why people who change in status, we advise not to do that. And in any case, you probably are really limited from even leaving the U.S. for probably 6 or 9 months until everyone in the family has gone through the process. So I hope this provided a little bit of information. You can go to our site, amlawglobal.com, where we've got a lot more information. And if that's not able to help you, feel free to reach out to us for a consultation when we can discuss more of these details one-on-one regarding your particular situation. Until next time, this was Charles Rather.